on public health and fire safety issues. And I want to start by first giving a special round of thanks from all of us to the more than 40 first responders with Portland Fire and Rescue that were part of the Multnomah County Task Force to tackle the Eagle Creek fire in the Columbia Gorge this month. It includes firefighters, our firefighters, that were crucial in protecting the lodge at Multnomah Falls. So we all extend an enormous amount of gratitude for your service. Thank you. So it's been about a year and a half since I hired Chief Mike Myers. And since that time, both he and I have been focused on how best to provide fire and rescue service to Portlanders and move into the future with changing needs, a growing population, and the use of best practices. As many of you know, Portland Fire and Rescue has been building blueprints for success in each of our fire management areas that forms a plan which allows us to tailor different approaches based on different needs of each fire management area. This better aligns with Fire and Rescue's growing role as a community health agency. Joining us here today to talk about this plan are Chief Mike Myers, Rachel Banks of the Multnomah County to talk about local health disparities, Jonathan Jay from the Harvard School of Public Health to talk about data modeling and fire predictability, and our international expert, Chief Stuart Edgar, who's here to talk about Gloucestershire's fire and rescue in the United Kingdom.
I thought you might need some help with that. Gloucestershire.
No. Okay, good. With that, I'll turn it over to Chief Myers.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Commissioner. And Mayor and Commissioners, thank you for having us here today. I know your time is extremely valuable, so we have about 2 hours with you this morning to cover a lot of data and a lot of information. So we'll move fairly quickly through most of this. I do leave about 10 minutes toward the end, hopefully, for questions and answers if you have them. But feel free to stop us if something is of much of importance. So I'll be very quick this morning and offer some, I'll allow individuals to go ahead and introduce themselves, and then I'll get us started. So why don't we start with Rachel? Why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. So, good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Rachel Banks, and I'm the Deputy Director of Multnomah County Public Health Division.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Stuart Edgar. I'm the Chief Fire Officer of Gloucestershire Fire and Rescue Service. I'm also a Director in the County Council, and I'm the National Lead for the UK National Fire Chiefs Council Prevention.
May I just ask you, sir, because based on your address, I'm just not sure which English Premier League team that you support.
Well, I support West Bromwich Albion.
Okay.
Yeah, and also, you're not from Gloucester, so which Scottish team do you support?
well noticed. I'm not from England. I'm from Scotland originally, and on the northeast coast, and I support a local football team called Dundee United. So I didn't think I'd ever say that when I was here in Portland, but there you go.
We just want to make sure our international hooligans are assembling outside.
And I was very privileged to go and see the Timbers game on Sunday evening, and it was an excellent game.
Yeah, very nice. It was a little lopsided, wasn't it? It was.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Jay. I'm a doctoral candidate at Harvard School of Public Health, focused on using analytics to reduce health risks in cities.
Excellent.
And I'm Mark Whitaker. I'm a principal management analyst here with Fire.
Well, as you can see, we've assembled quite a team for you this morning. I think what you're going to find out is if we were able to compile the information that we have and really present to you a case for what we're looking for in the future, we will be setting a model that is a leading model for the U.S. fire industry. So we brought in some pretty interesting individuals. My first slide, and please, I beg you some forgiveness on etiquette. I'll be turning my back to you on occasion just to make sure I'm capturing what's on the screen. If you would have asked me 100 years ago, 200 years ago, Chief, what is your greatest issue that you're facing as a fire chief? I would have told you it is fire. It is burning our cities down. We're losing large swaths of commercial property, large swaths of residential properties. It is stopping commerce and disrupting business, and we have large refugee populations from these large major fires, which occurred in almost every major city in the United States, and including in England. Over time, over the next 100 years till today, that problem of those great fires were solved. It was solved not just by the fire service alone. It was the fire service, it was public health, It was street planners and urban planners. It was manufacturers, building developers, policy people, governments. All came together over time, over about 100 years, and we solved the great fire problem that was affecting our big cities. I would argue today, however, that the cities are still on fire. It's not the red stuff that's burning our cities down today. It's not the red stuff that's disrupting commerce and disrupting human lives. It's the other things that we are well versed in the urban setting. It's poverty, it's unemployment, it's high incarceration rates, it's low graduation rates, it's poor access to food, poor access to parks, poor diets. It's a combination of these public health threats that are affecting our residents today, and what is still leading to those things that were affecting us years ago. It is my theory as your fire chief that we can fix this again in the fire service, but not alone. It will take partners from across the board. Again, people that we may have never worked with before. Public health, other agencies around the world that are doing amazing things. So that's what today's presentation is about. It's about finding opportunities. I have a small story for you. Well, first, let me talk about the risk factors for fire deaths. These risk factors for fire deaths, and you can read them up on the screen, mental health, smoking, alcohol, those are pretty common risks for fire deaths. But if you're clever enough and you know a little bit about public health, you'll also know that those look awfully familiar to you. Those are also the risks for poor health. They're almost absolutely aligned. One of the things that Jonathan will be able to show us is education levels, health disparities, fire death risk factors all align in our community. I have a little story for you because this is going to be very important as you ask yourself, why is the fire service interested in taming this issue? The story goes like this. There's a village, and near the village a river runs by it. It has a waterfall. At the bottom of the waterfall, the water pools. And one day, villagers are heard screaming, there's a child in the pool below the waterfall. And villagers come to rescue the child. And as they're rescuing the child, another child tumbles over the waterfall. More villagers come. More rescuers are screamed for. Another child. More rescuers. Over the period of hours, more rescuers are screamed to come to the waterfall to help get these children out of the pool. One rescuer, however, is running away. And the villagers scream at the rescuer, where are you going? We need your help here to pull these children out of this pool. Where are you going? And the rescuer stopped and turned back. So I'm going to the top of the waterfall to find out why the children are entering the river in the first place. This is upstreaming healthcare. This is a change in the way we're going to do business in community risk reduction. It's upstreaming, getting ahead of the problem and finding out what are those social interests that are causing these issues. So first, I've asked Rachel to help us out today, and she's going to lead us off on discussing some social health determinant issues here in the city of Portland. Rachel?
Thank you, Chief Myers, and thank you for telling our favorite public health story about moving upstream and figuring out why children are falling in the river. So I appreciate that once again. A pleasure to be here. Today I'm going to talk with you about some leading public health indicators, some of which Chief Myers talked about. But before I do that, I will share with you a little bit about public health in general and our public health division. All of this I'm going to do in a framework of health inequities that really follows, if you think about that river story, it really follows along there. So the data that I'll be presenting today is going to be within that context, and I'll tell you more about that. Next slide, please. So our vision is healthy people and healthy communities. And the part that I'm going to be focusing on is the healthy communities, because we can't have healthy people without healthy communities. And public health specifically, you can see the World Health Organization definition, but it's really about preventing disease for the entire community. So whereas in healthcare, the patient, if you will, might be an individual that walks into a clinic. For public health, the patient is the entire population. And done well, at times you won't even know what's happening because you won't see the disease outbreaks and you won't see some of the disease and whatnot. So we really seek to keep people out of the need for care. We seek to prevent things like fire deaths and so on and so forth. And we do that in partnership with the communities that we serve by assuring, protecting, and promoting. Assuring means we don't always deliver the services per se, but we work with other partners to make sure that that's happening. Public health is an art and a science, and I'm going to talk to you a bit about both of those things. In our jargon, we talk about core program areas and then also competencies. So we'll go through that as well. So moving on to the framework for inequities that we'll be talking about. And I know this is kind of small, so I'll walk you through it. But it is really magnifying this upstream approach. And what we know in health and the health of folks is that the biggest predictors of health are not the things that you're going to see on the left-hand side, but rather they are the things on the right hand, or excuse me, I said that backwards. So not the things on the right-hand side, but the things on the left-hand side. Things like social and institutional inequities, they have the greatest impact on health. On the left side, you see that social and institutional inequities, and with each, as we move farther to the right, they impact health conditions, and I'll dig down into this as we move forward. Thank you. So public health, what do we do? Here's a variety of things that we do, and I'll give you just a touch. In our health promotion and disease prevention, we do things like maternal, child, and family health. So that includes running like the WIC program, Women's, Infants, and Children Nutrition Education and Nutrition Vouchers. We do case management for pregnant and parenting families, and we work with healthcare systems to ensure that families have the best birth outcomes. Chronic disease prevention, it's a huge part of our work, really focusing upstream on things like tobacco, nutrition, physical activity, and access to chronic disease self-management if folks need it. Violence prevention is another piece. So we work with youth, we work with you all and LIPSIC and a variety of other ways to both provide youth the education that's needed, really look at the place, and we use an approach called placemaking as peacemaking. So trying to transform the space and the neighborhoods that folks are in and give them a way to be in the other options besides violence in their communities. Communicable disease is another bucket. These are things like sexually transmitted infections, as well as tuberculosis, influenza, the flu, and preventing foodborne illnesses as well. And then in this bucket, things like harm reduction, so syringe exchange, working for policies such as the availability of naloxone, so on and so forth. And then disease investigation and response. So that is, we work to treat diseases if folks have it, but ultimately try to prevent that by tracking the spread of disease and getting ahead of it. And then environmental health is another huge bucket, and this includes things like vector control, right? So mosquitoes, bed bugs, bees, rats, all of those sort of things. Really working for healthy homes and communities, working to resolve things like lead, air quality, asthma, and then restaurant inspection. So those are some examples. I also wanted to call out, which you'll hear a lot more about, so I didn't focus on as much here today, but our other key partners who are not in the public health division, but in our public health system include our emergency response. So things like, massive fires, preparing for natural disasters and those sort of things. And then also our Tri-County Health Officer, Dr. Paul Lewis, who works across the metro region. So moving on to how we do the work, and this is some of the art and the science. One is epidemiology and assessment. So our job is to share data for the entire population, including trends with you all and other folks. While healthcare systems may have information about their patients or their populations, public health is the unique provider in our community to data on the entire population, and once again, tracking those trends. Much thanks to our EPI unit who provided the data for this presentation today. Give a shout out to Dr. Franklin and his team. Public policy, this is a huge part. We are obviously not the policy makers, but public policy has a huge impact on the health of folks. And
Try to interrupt you
yeah.
for a moment. I'm sorry, it's driving me nuts.
Yeah.
Can you swap microphones and see if that
Yes.
might be contagious?
Is this better? Well, we can prevent that contagion. We work on that in public health too. So we'll just go ahead and get some quarantine going on. Absolutely. So public policy and systems and environmental change. So the things that make it hard for individuals to be healthy, those things are shared as a community as a whole. And that includes, smoke-free workplace laws is an example that many people understand. We work in community partnerships. Mary Lou Carrera is here from Oregon Health Equity Alliance. She works on our community health, leads our community health improvement plan, and that's a huge part as our major driving goal, or is really around health equity and cultural competence. Clearly, there's a ton of work to do, and we have, this is a stream that infuses all of our work. And really, the community partnerships, I just want to highlight that especially as well. And just note that with systemic racism, right, it impacts communities based on a variety of different factors that are not their fault. It's unjust. We know we can do something about it. And the way that racism works in health inequities is that it exacerbates as the life goes on. And it gets worse for communities of color the longer the lifespan. And then communications. This includes things like you may see billboards or commercials that talk about health promotion and healthy behaviors and such. So we do that mass communication as well. Just in terms of, excuse me, to be clear on our approach for health equity, this is not a we do the same for everyone. We differentiate equality and equity, equity being we want to get to the same outcomes for varying communities, and that means because folks are starting at different places, we need to have differing interventions or strategies, if you will. So in this example, if everybody, our goal is that everybody can reach that pesticide-free, delicious organic fruit that is grown in pristine air quality and soil quality, clearly that we need to apply different interventions for that. And that really gets to our principle of intentionality as compared to utility. So to dive down into the next slide into the graphic, if you will, we're going to start by focusing on the social and institutional inequities. Social in this model, and just to be clear, this comes from the Bay Area Regional Health Inequities group, fondly known as BARHI. And social includes class. So this is race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, immigration status. The institutional inequities here are impacted by, are impacted by, there's a reciprocal relationship there, people's social class, and this includes government, our policies and practices, corporations and businesses, their policies, practices as they relate to promoting a healthy environment or the opposite, schools, not-for-profits, so on and so forth. Before I get into the data, I do want to say a couple of things. One is a disclaimer, I am not an epidemiologist. There may be questions that you have that I'm happy to take back to our epi team, but want to throw that out there. And then what I will be doing through the course of this presentation is talking about local data, regional, as well as at times comparing Multnomah County to the state, to the U.S., and at times other counties. One additional thing I would say about the data is this is Multnomah County data, as this is in effect our health jurisdiction, if you will. So there are some maps that narrow in on Portland's specific, but the data is for the county as a whole, which includes the city of Gresham, Troutdale, et cetera. So what we know, and as Chief Myers indicated, which really impacts health and fire and a variety of other things, are things like poverty. So in our region, what you see is that Washington, Clackamas, and Clackamas counties have the highest median incomes. Multnomah County has and this is Multnomah County is in the blue here. It has the highest percentage of families living in poverty, the highest percentage of children under 18 living in poverty, and the highest utilization of SNAP, which is a supplemental nutrition assistance program. Some people know that as food stamps. So that relatively, obviously, has impacts on health and can have.
By the way, there's a kind of a built-in paradox, it seems to me, in this data, and I'll just want to get your opinion on this. There's a myth, and that we hear every time we're talking about funding the social safety net, that the more robust the services, the more likely we're putting out the welcome mat. And we hear this particularly around homeless services, that if we have robust services, we're essentially drawing people from around the country to come take advantage of the services. I think we've done a good job ever since Bud Clark knocking down that myth. But we still have more services. So people do come to Portland, they do come to Old Town Chinatown. At the same time, we're seeing the effects of a rising housing market that is effectively displacing people, and not just to the edges of our community, but out of our community. So there's a paradox, because people are coming here for services. We're also displacing people because they can't afford to live here. And first, how do you reconcile that? And two, is it your sense that in 10 years, these are going to be radically different numbers because of displacement? In other words, we're going to see more poverty in places like Washington County and Clackamas County?
Yeah, I mean, so to answer that, I think if we continue on the trend and displacement, we are going to see more poverty in other places. And we've seen that as, the migration of folks moving out east in Multnomah County, for instance. I think in terms of the paradox, I mean, it's my opinion that, folks really focus on the service aspect. That's tangible. That's sometimes an easier solution. But what we know, at least in terms of health, it is those upstream factors. It is displacement and economic income and education that are going to have the biggest impact and the biggest solution. So yes, I think those are going to have a bigger impact on the amount of folks needing services. They also offer the best solution point. Services, obviously, as you all know better than I, in the example of homelessness, are absolutely necessary. But as in the river example, right, we're going to keep pulling people out of the river if that's just the intervention point. And so I think really the key is a comprehensive solution that has that mix of services, but really focuses upstream as best as possible and shifts investments more upstream over time.
And by the way, in every area that this council has responsibility for, I think each one of us could give a testimonial. The upstream investment is a more effective and strategic dollar, and it saves the taxpayers money.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's what's so frustrating about it. In almost every instance, the upstream dollar is more cost effective.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your question. As if you knew what was coming next in terms of this data, we have housing expenses. This is obviously no surprise to anyone here. But in this, we're using affordability as less than 30% of a family's income on rent or housing payments relative to the rest of the region. Multnomah County, about 34% of folks are spending more than 30% of their income on housing, and this is homeowners. When we talk about renters, this jumps to over 57%. So over half of every family that's renting is spending more than 30% of their income on housing. Moving to educational attainment, once again, a range across the region. Actually, and here we see that relative to the other counties, thank you, Multnomah County has the highest amount of folks with a 4-year degree there. So we have increased relative to other counties. And then moving on to living conditions, and I'm going to speed through some of this. But just to tell you what we're talking about, this is the physical environment, it's the economic environment, the social environment, and the service environment, somewhat to your point, Commissioner. And so the physical environment, this includes things like land use, transportation, housing, exposure to toxins. In the economic environment, this is employment, income, so on and so forth. Social, this is people's experiences of race, class, gender, etc., violence, culture, arts. And then the service environment includes the social services, healthcare, et cetera. Access to grocery stores is one way to get upstream in terms of chronic diseases, and I'll talk to you a bit later about the leading causes of death and chronic disease being one of them. The upstream approach isn't to focus on the disease itself and carve out those diseases and say we're going to do this for diabetes and this for stroke, but to move up and say what's the common between all of them. Nutrition is it. So we see here that basically the closer in Multnomah County, so the city of Portland relatively has better access to grocery stores than if we moved farther out. In the next slide, this talks about food deserts. Regionally, Multnomah County has less food deserts. This is defined as not having grocery store access within a half a mile of where you live. And at a later date, I'd be happy to tell you about some of our strategies to deal with retail and food deserts across the county. The next slide really talks about the location of our services and the striped, candy cane striped area that you'll see is need. And the blue overlay is public health. This is where we focus. So once again, we're in the entire population, but focused down on areas of need. The triangles represent different specific services as well.
Just while you're here,
Yeah.
ask that on all the maps, and this isn't just you, so it seems a lot.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of blank space up in Clark County, but my neighbourhood in Southwest is actually off the map. So it would be helpful to move the whole
Lift it
thing up.
Okay, thank you. Great feedback. Appreciate that. So moving on to risk behaviors, this is once again what most people focus in on. It's most familiar to people, and most people think it's the best solution. If those people, and you can fill in the those people, that's clearly not the words I'm using, just to use an example for the record. If whoever stopped smoking or had different sex or ate better or whatever, then this problem would be solved. But we know that that's just simply not the case and not the best solution. Risk behaviors are the things that folks know, smoking, et cetera. Disease and injury includes our communicable and chronic diseases. And then mortality is death, things like infant mortality and life expectancy. So then moving on to some of the data for this area of the framework. This is a snapshot of how Multnomah County does relative to other similarly sized and demographically similar counties in the U.S. So we have King County and Washington and Hennepin County. In all of these indicators, Multnomah County is higher than our counterparts in King County and Hennepin County. And just a note in terms of the severe housing, this is defined as having one of four, at least one out of four housing issues, and those include things like plumbing, do you have a kitchen facilities, affordability, that sort of stuff.
Can I ask you something?
Sure.
In the earlier slide on poverty, you had 24% of children under the age of 18 in poverty. And here, Multnomah County, you have 19%. Is there what's the gap?
Let me go back and look. My suspicion is they're looking at different time periods.
Okay.
2014 versus 2007.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Keen observation.
Makes sense though, because if it's 24, this is 17, so we're actually doing better. We've got 5% fewer children in poverty.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. But
That's surprising.
I know it's contrary. I will let me find out more about that and get back to you
The
all.
number is so staggering. I want to make sure that whatever the current number is, that we're using the right one.
Still a
It's
fifth, yeah.
It's a sobering number.
Yeah, for sure.
I wouldn't take it as a good indicator either way.
Yeah.
Maybe we've just forced 5% of our impoverished population out of the city.
Yeah. Thank you. In terms of the leading causes of death, what we see here is cancers, the number one cause in Multnomah County, followed closely by heart disease, and then a variety of other things like stroke, diabetes, so on and so forth. I'm going to quickly move to the next slide, which compares our leading causes of death with those across the nation. And in cancer, excuse me, we have higher rates of cancer, lower rates of heart disease, lower rates of unintentional injury, but higher rates of Alzheimer's, diabetes, and suicide. I'm actually going to skip past, I'm not going to skip past infant mortality. I want to use it, or low birth weight. Low birth weight is a key indicator for infant mortality. It is also what we know from our most current science linked to chronic disease. This really dispels the myth, right, that if those adults ate better, we're seeing impacts for chronic disease predisposition that date back to in the mother's womb. We see disparities in this area, and the reason why I didn't put the disparities data in sooner is really to have the context that we're not focusing in on the individuals or populations, but really understanding the ways in which we construct our societies impact the choices that people have. So the choices that people make are determined by the choices that they have. The choices that they have are determined by their neighborhood. We know that zip code is a stronger predictor of health and life expectancy than genetic code. And as you can see, the way that we're constructing our societies, that is in effect going to determine the health of our population. I am actually going to breeze past a couple of these next slides. Opioid deaths by county, Multnomah County clearly is the highest, and in here there's a couple of policy interventions.
I wouldn't breeze over that.
No, you want to go to?
I think that's important data, don't you?
I do. I want to respect time too, so I'll leave it to you to say. I have probably a few more slides to get
Yeah,
through.
so, Rachel's on her time constraint, but I want to make sure this is impactful for you. So these items that are of importance to you, this portion of the presentation was meant to inform you about some of the public health threats that you may or may not already be aware of in your community. So really this is your time. If we feel like we can touch on these things. If not, we can move on. But if there's a little bit of interest from the commissioner or the mayor, let's go ahead and touch on it.
Absolutely.
11:30 today. We have obviously a very tight framework here. It's, each person has about 20 minutes, and I've offered the chief here 40.
All right, well, then let's keep going.
Okay.
Well, just let me ask a question
Yeah.
then. I think a lot of us are going to have follow-up questions to drill down in the data.
Nick, use your mic.
All right.
Use your mic, please.
I think a lot of us are going to have follow-up questions to sort of drill down in the data. And could you just let us know at the end of your presentation where we should send our questions to?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Great. So in terms of firearm deaths, we really break down into kind of all causes, suicide, and homicide. The take-home here is that among all cases of firearm death, Multnomah County has a lower rate than the state as a whole and the U.S. But when we look at something, for instance, like homicide, Multnomah County is higher than the state, but lower than the national rate. So just some comparisons there. The next slide is youth and adult tobacco use. We know that about 20% of our adult population is using tobacco at any given time. The overwhelming majority of people who are using tobacco or smoking want to quit. And in terms of 8th graders, we see that there's about 9%, and that's in the past 30 days. Just to summarize all the data in conclusion here, we this is from our health disparities report card. And what you'll see is all of 33 indicators, many of which I've talked about today, are listed here by race and ethnicity. So the darker the blue is really talks about the number of disparities that need intervention. In the Black and African American community, you can see that number is 9, that the disparity requires intervention. That's immediate, like red flag intervention. The next is 18, and that is like needs improvement, still not okay. And that's how the data is. There are the white bar is if we don't have enough data. So you see that in the Native American and American Indian population. And then the gray is no disparity. But I want to caution us in the no disparity bucket that what we see, for instance, if you look at the Asian and Pacific Islander population, we know this is a function of aggregating the data in this way. And communities consistently tell us we need to disaggregate the data so that we can fully understand the impacts on communities, Pacific Islander communities and such. To this end, we have implemented culturally specific strategies in a variety of areas: the African American population, Native American, immigrant and refugee, Hispanic, Latino, and Pacific Islander. And another time I'm happy to talk to you about the work there. We'll breeze past this next slide, some of what we're doing about it, and the next slide talks about references. And then I will give you my email address for follow-ups. So it's, and I'm sure you can forward this information as well. But for the record, it's rachel.m.banks@multco.us, and that's Rachel with an L spelled like Michael.
We'll make sure we get that information to you commissioners and mayors so that if we have follow-up questions, we can do that. Obviously, we could spend a whole day talking about these issues. That's how important they are. Rachel, I know you've been having a busy week, so thank you for putting all this together for us. I thought you did there's a lot of data, and to get it that concise, I really appreciate it, so thank you. Next up, it is really an honor to have an opportunity to introduce the next person. I'll let him do that for us. But our intent is to be world-class with the City of Portland, and as far as the Fire Bureau is concerned. And I'm often asked what that means, who will be following, and I tell everybody we're not following anybody. We are going to set a trend, and we are going to develop the way the fire service conducts business in the future. So the reason that John Jay has come to us is we kind of had an interesting way we've met. But Jonathan is working on some interesting work at Harvard that we think will be the leading way to predict fire deaths in the future. Jonathan and I's relationship, I hope, will grow. We do believe that as we move past fire deaths, we'll be also looking at how we can do higher predictability about other health outcomes. So we are just cutting the surface here. Jonathan, why don't you introduce yourself and take it from there.
Hi. Thanks so much for having me. I'm John Jay. I'm a doctoral student at Harvard School of Public Health. Thank you to the Portland Fire and Rescue. This has been a really exciting project for me. It's become part of my dissertation, and thank you for having me today. So my job here was basically to make two lists. One for properties that are inspectable, it's commercial and larger multifamily, and another for single-family properties that might be where the fire department could visit to reduce fire risk through community risk reduction. Make those lists in a way that's ranked by fire risk in order to target the highest risk places with those visits. And then to validate the model, I'll be telling you some of the results from that validation exercise today, and along the way pull out some insights about fire risk in Portland. So just briefly on why predicting fire risk is important and using data well is important. This first image is from the Ghost Ship fire in Oakland. The one thing that emerged from that fire was that the city had not been doing a good job of doing inspections in a timely and systematic way. My work on this emerged from, sort of builds on some work from Atlanta, Georgia, which had initially brought in a bunch of data scientists to help them make a more comprehensive list of properties for inspection. When they got that list back, they realized it was so much longer than their existing list that they needed to prioritize and do the highest risk ones first. So I showed, using data from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, that it was possible to get similar results using data that are much more streamlined and already publicly available. Most cities already have it, and to extend the model from only inspectable properties to include single-family residences where most fire deaths occur. Just by way of framing, we could think of this as a needle in a haystack problem. If each of these boxes is a representative commercial building in the city of Portland, in the aggregate, fires are common. You will see fires, but at any given property, the risk is pretty low. The rate is less than 1 in 100 for fire incidents per year. So that means that many of your inspections are happening at places where it was unlikely that a fire would have occurred, whether you had gone or not. So the solution here is to try and stack the deck in favor of more effective inspections. Here, we've sort of artificially used 5 categories, and the idea is if we do the highest risk ones first, or exclusively, or focus our attention there, these are real results from the model. We will each visit will be more likely to happen at a property that was going to have a fire. So I'll go pretty briefly on the methods, but stop me if I can explain anything further.
Could I just ask
Yeah,
a
of course.
basic question? So where is this leading? Is this leading to you're going to spend your time, money, and resource on inspecting higher risk properties, or you're going to deploy equipment closer to higher risk properties? What's the goal here?
Yeah, I can answer that for you, Mayor. Ultimately, in the end, yes. So the intent is to realign the way we do community risk reduction, realign the way we may be delivering response to those how the neighborhood needs or wants to be treated, and where the data shows the most impact can be made. If we continue to operate in the fire service the same way we have in the past, which is simply put an engine company in an area and hope for the best, or we just take a list of commercial structures and begin to do inspections, the chance of us really, well, first of all, we're not using data to drive our business. It's an inefficient approach.
Okay.
So ultimately, I will wrap this up at the end and kind of give you a little bit of an idea on where we're headed, because largely that's what I'm interested in gaining your support.
I was just curious so I could listen aggressively, because I was
Yeah.
just curious where this is headed.
Yeah, this is really about a new way to do predictive modeling, both for fire and public health. That's why it was so important to get it out to you.
Cool. Thanks. Sorry to interrupt, Jonathan.
No problem. So, as I said, this method uses data that every city has access to. So, primarily parcel records from the tax assessor's department. So, building size, the year it was built, the assessed value of the land and the building itself, fire incidents from the last 5 years out of the fire department, code violations, so building code violations, nuisance violations coming from the building inspection department, some crime incidents, although that's been sort of a side. There have been some limitations on that, and then U.S. Census data for socio-demographic variables, which end up being very important for single-family fires. This is a machine learning model that takes advantage of the size of the data set. There's 230,000 parcel records in Portland, and with a data set that large and with 5 years of data, there's a lot for an algorithm to go through and identify patterns, both in individual variables and combinations of variables. I'm going to talk about those in a minute. For validation, what the fire department asked was to act as if we had done this a year ago and see how well the predictions would have worked out. So I took the data from 2012 through 2015, ran the model, and issued predictions for 2016, then compared those predictions to what actually happened in 2016. Just to, as I said, show you how the sort of the risk factors work. For example, single-family residences in the city of Portland, if the owner of the property's listed mailing address in the tax assessment records is the same as the address of the property, so basically if the owner lives at the property, that property has 2.6 times lower risk of fire incidents in a given year. That's something that the model picks up on. I mentioned that we included socio-demographic factors. These are, you call them hot and cold spot maps for employment on the left.
By the way, can I just note that that's a fascinating piece of data. And Chief, it reminds me when we were taking up short-term rentals, we require that if you open up your house to a short-term rental, that you actually occupy that house. Mm-hmm. And that data suggests that that actually makes, that if you extrapolate out that data, that the guest is likely to be safer if it is an owner-occupied home with a short-term rental.
And that,
What do you mean by smoothed?
these are data that come from the census at the block group level. So if you took the raw data, what you'd get is you get just a single estimate per block group. It would be little polygons. But we can guess, we can interpolate between groups that if you're a house that's kind of on the border between two block groups, for all we know, it's kind of halfway between what we would expect from the middle of those neighborhoods.
Thank you. And are you going to talk about multifamily as well?
Yes. Yes. So here we're still on employment and education. So you see similar spatial trends in these sociodemographic variables. The same trend comes out when you use similar methods on single-family residential fires. These are 2016 data only. Yeah, of course.
I thought Jonathan gave me this presentation yesterday, Mayor and Commissioners, I thought that this was where it started to make definable sense for me, the relationship between public health, risk factors, fire deaths, and other public health and social health determinants. So this is why these graphs are so important. The heat relations are the same: education, jobs, health risk. That's the correlation.
The smoothed figers are the predictive, the outcomes of your
These are
model?
still actual data.
Oh, this is all actual data, okay.
And I didn't include these slides, but CDC estimates for smoking, poor physical health, and poor mental health show similar spatial patterns in Portland, and I can follow up with those maps if you'd like. Here's multifamily. These are the larger multifamily properties that with a particular property code. The top right is properties with that are larger and higher value. Bottom left is smaller and lower value. The model is recognizing that just an apartment building that's bigger with more people in it has higher risk. And so that's not the only predictive factor. We can see that, in fact, fire incidence tends to cluster. If you can see those white stars, it tends to cluster in those larger, higher value buildings, but not only. And so we'll come back to the additional risk factors.
Can I just be clear?
Yes.
That's on a per building basis, not on a per unit basis.
Exactly.
Okay, great, thank you.
But that is an important question in how to model all of these issues. And so I don't mean to overwhelm you, but this is a list for each of these categories, the strongest correlates of risk. And for me, what stood out was that for commercial, the same is true for multifamily, that attributes of the building are the strongest predictors. And for single family, it's really the sociodemographic variables, employment, education, that are strongest. Plus, prior code violations or nuisance violations help single out those properties that have a history of maybe poor management or problematic ownership. It was important to show that this model actually works. Just going back to this idea of random visits, that sort of serves as the comparator here, just for validation's sake, even though the fire department is already has some ranking categories for inspections. So,
excuse me, just before you go on.
Yes.
The previous slide about risk, what do the pluses and minuses mean?
Sorry, that's where an increase in that variable is associated with either an increase in fire risk, a plus, or a decrease in fire risk
So
would
if
be
they've got more
minus.
men, they're more likely to have fires.
Yes, and it's interesting for commercial because that variable is more an estimate of what's going on in the surrounding blocks. So a commercial property in a neighborhood with more males seems to face higher risk. Sure.
These are statistically significant.
No, and these are the strongest correlates, and they would be statistically significant as correlations. The model doesn't work in the same way as a traditional regression model, where you would say that a particular, it doesn't tell you as much about what it's doing behind the scenes. But we could run a regression to see that. It would be less predictively accurate, but it would be more explanatory. So here what we're saying is, just sort of as a matter of artifice, what if we were to take visit 1/5 of the properties within a given category? If you had chosen those properties randomly, you'd expect to have anticipated 1/5 of the fires by visiting 1/5 of the properties. But if we target, we think we can do better. The question is how much better. So for these inspectable properties, This is what the estimated risk looks like. And you can see first a cluster of the presumably the larger, higher value buildings around downtown, with additional clusters along the northern border and the northeast. And these are tended to be pretty accurate. That high-risk group, Group 5 on the far right, is 2.5 times, has 2.5 times the fire incidence of a group that you would have chosen randomly, any randomly chosen fifth.
Just cognitively, that doesn't make any sense that the higher value, better buildings are on fire more often than the shacks that are derelict.
These are, it doesn't necessarily follow the trend of higher value for their size. I think in a way we're not controlling for size, so I think it tracks just building size. Multifamily, these are the larger apartment buildings. Here there's a strong trend towards the east side. And these are 2.2 times in that high-risk group, that high-risk 20%, you're hitting 2.2 times more fires than if you had chosen that fifth randomly. For single family, you have, again, a strong trend towards the east side, as well as some of the northern border in these estimates. Generally, these estimates are pretty good. This is you'd anticipate 1.9 times more fires in that high-risk group. In this case, that highest risk fifth is very large. It's 32,000 properties, which might not be useful for every purpose. So if you narrow down and go more highly targeted, you're doing up to 5 times better than random chance by going only to the properties that the model is most confident about.
Now, I've gone back to your sheet on top correlates of risk, and on single-family residential, after you get past employment and education, prior code violations is number 4. So I'm guessing that's a big factor here as we look east and we look at the risk factors.
I think so. I can map that too and send it if it would be helpful.
Do we currently inspect single family?
Nate, I don't think we currently inspect single-family dwellings, do we? On request only?
You have to come up to the microphone, otherwise the captioners can't hear. Thank you.
There's a Fire Marshal, Nate Takara.
So basically, we do home inspection requests when we do smoke alarm installs. So a lot of times we canvass certain areas. What we try to do after fires, we try to go to the neighborhoods and do smoke alarm campaigns. We knock at the neighborhoods and so forth, requesting if they need some. And so during the install, there's times that we will do an informal home inspection.
You know, Commissioner Saltzman, I know that you've been very engaged in expanding that voluntary program. And I think one of the things we've learned is that if a firefighter knocks on someone's door, there's going to be less resistance to having that person come in. Given the kind of micro-targeting we can do here, Chief, and looking at the high-risk factors the further out you go east, it seems to me that one thing we should be talking about in a future meeting is identifying homes that have young children and an older adult, particularly if it's a single older adult, so someone aging in place but doesn't have someone else helping them. And figuring out a way of turbocharging our program around looking at smoke detectors. Because my understanding is that when you get a firefighter in the house voluntarily and they see the newspaper stacked next to the fireplace, they see the 10 electrical outlets, in the corner, they see the heating pad, or other kinds of things. There's a whole host of preventative things we can do when we get in. The question is, how do you get in and how do you scale it? The data certainly suggests we could do a pretty good job of targeting neighborhoods, and then we could do some demographic analysis. And I'm sure, my guess is that if money wasn't an object, Dan would say, let's start with families with young children, older adults that are alone, things like that, and correlate those risk factors.
Well, therein lies the exact point of the presentation. The intent here today is to describe to you the public health threats that are facing Portland. It is to also draw a correlation between public health and fire, my personal mission is for the wellness and the health and welfare of the Portlanders, all Portlanders, and we do a lot of medical runs. 80% of our work that we do is emergency medical related. There is a direct correlation between health risk. You can see it on the data is clear. The work that Jonathan does, what becomes more and more interesting as I talk to him more, is the ability to drill down to almost the home that we need to go visit. That kind of data has never been available to U.S. fire industry and has probably been out of reach for public health at sometimes. So that's where we're getting to. You're right on track. That's what this presentation was supposed to do, is stimulate those kinds of thoughts, because that's where we're headed in this presentation.
And Chief Edgar may mention how in the UK they have those property level individual data, I think from the credit agency, Experian, and we talked yesterday about ways that emergency medical response data that the department already has could be used to help identify, to even do more micro-targeting. Just to acknowledge sort of that same point, the estimates that we have of property level values for each of those census variables is just imputed. We don't know those particularly for any given property, and there may be other places we can get those. Again, this is just prediction. This is, in a way, the easy part. The next step is what happens when you get to the property and making sure that that operation is as efficient as possible. If you don't mind my adding a few comments too, I would say part of why this has been successful so far is the amount of help I was able to get from within the fire department and the amount of savvy with data that the department already has. Also, I think this fits into a broader trend in the U.S. towards greater use of data in city government, a culture of innovation in city agencies. This is among the leading edge type of projects with cities like Chicago prioritizing restaurant inspections according to predictive models, and other cities doing these kinds of things, the projects that start as experiments but work well enough to reshape the way that their services are delivered.
Thank you, Jonathan. Really well done. When Dan and I talked early on, when I started here almost a year and a half ago, we talked about taking Portland and making Portland Fire and Rescue, the Bureau, world class. And in order to do that, we had to look around the world to see who's doing what. And it's obvious that not only are going to, we're pretty data sophisticated now. We think with a little bit of help from Jonathan and Mark Whitaker here next to me as a principal analyst with us, has done amazing work. We think we will definitely lead by data to become more efficient. But we've identified the key place around the world that we think is leading the world in community risk reduction. Gloucestershire and Greater Manchester, two areas on this globe that are doing amazing work. In my conversations with the Chief Edgar, it's clear that that's where the pinnacle of community risk reduction is being done. I've asked Chief Edgar to take the long flight across the Atlantic to meet us here today. He graciously accepted, and we've been meeting over the past 3 days, and he'll join us today in the afternoon for our Zero Fire Deaths Task Force meeting. So it is my honor to introduce to you Stuart Edgar. And Chief, would you go ahead and introduce yourself and give us your presentation?
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Chief Myers. As I said previously, my name's Chief Stuart Edgar. I'm from Gloucestershire in England, albeit I am originally from Scotland. And I'm also the UK National Fire Chiefs Council lead for prevention. And we've worked very hard across England, but particularly in Gloucestershire and, as Chief Myers said, in Greater Manchester over the last sort of 4 years to try and reduce what was the worst fire death histories in Western Europe that England had for a number of years. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you a bit of a journey. I'm going to take you back across the Atlantic. I'm going to give you a bit of a 5-minute whiz round of where we are and give you a bit of context about England and the UK. And then I'm going to go deeper into Gloucestershire. So in the UK, in England, we've got 45 fire and rescue services. I don't know, is Mark going to? Yeah, Mark's going to. Sorry. That's fine. I can't do two things at once. I think that's what it is, isn't it? So in England, we've got 45 fire and rescue services. We are responsible for the Department of the Home Office. In Scotland, they've got a single fire and rescue service now. Northern Ireland, they've got a single service, and in Wales, they've got 3. We've all got separate legislation, and we've all got different governance arrangements. And on the kind of right-hand side of that slide, I've just given you a bit of the population where we are in the UK at this moment in time. And Gloucestershire is very similar to the city, the metro city of Portland. We've got 620,000 of a population with some urban conurbations, but some rural areas as well. We are currently still part of the EU, not for long though. And I don't think it's around this table is the place to have that conversation. But the reason I introduced that is because we don't actually know what the outcomes and the impacts of Brexit's going to be for us. But what we do know is over the last 7 years, we've had austerity and we've had to have reduced budgets and we've had to deliver more with less. And,
if I might just interrupt, because one of my favourite fact is the island of Great Britain is the same size as Oregon, and they have 65 million people, and it's quite nice there with lots of open space. So it can be done.
Well, in the next slide, though, the offer in the UK is varied, and it's a very fragmented approach, and you can question whether it's efficient and effective right across the country, because in terms of for value for money, we break it down, and some services offer their fire and rescue service, and it's a £26, this is GBP per head of population, and some of the other services it goes up to £70, and I think the British government across there are asking us some serious questions about why there is such a varied cost per head of population in delivering a fire and rescue service. And the £70 service doesn't mean you're getting a better offer, not necessarily. So 3 fire and rescue services were identified very much as pace setters. So Gloucestershire, Staffordshire and Greater Manchester. Staffordshire to a certain degree have dropped out because of the resistance and the difficulties they've had to get through, the political element and also the staff, particularly the trade unions. It's not been an easy journey for any of us, but that's been very difficult. And the next slide, Mark, if you put that one up, we just introduced this new United Kingdom National Fire Chiefs Council so that we were going to be less fragmented, and we were going to introduce the fire reform agenda from the UK Home Office in a more unified and consistent way. And it was in a way which was going to look at safer and more resilient communities. And from that, we have 9 coordination committees. And one of those coordination committees is prevention, which is the next slide, Marcus, which is the one I lead. And we are there to promote and support fire and rescue service to tackle social issues and lead safer, healthier and more resilient communities. And it's been well accepted, and every fire and rescue service now is signed up to this UK National Fire Chiefs Council. So we move to the next slide. There has been a bit of an event which happened, and I'm glad John introduced one of the fires here in the US. We've had a serious fire in the UK in London, and it's made national news. And the building which is on the screen now is Grenfell Tower. That's in its concrete state before they put the external aluminium composite cladding on it. And the reason I bring this into place is because in England, in 2005, the government deregulated fire safety, and building regulations remained, and it was then the responsible person, the owner, the occupier of that building who was responsible to carry out a fire risk assessment. That was taken away from the fire and rescue service. So there was a group of people who carry out these risk assessments across the UK, and the fire and rescue service's responsibility is to carry out random audits of these fire risk assessments. And I think the government at the time, they're a Conservative government, and they were very, very keen to lose bureaucracy, lose the health and safety. And in fact, David Cameron called health and safety the evil of making progress.
Chief, can I ask you a question on that?
Sure.
On that building? I know that there's all kinds of different housing in England, and it's a little different than us, but would you remind us, was this public or private? Was this managed by the borough or some private? What category did this housing fall in?
Okay, so it was a local authority premise up into the mid-2000s. It was then given to a housing association because, again, the local authorities were shrinking. They were trying to give these buildings away to housing associations who could run them for them on their behalf. So that's what happened in 2006.
And was the housing association a private entity or a public
private
entity?
enterprise?
I see.
Private enterprise, and therein lies. But if you put the next slides up now, I'm sorry for turning around. Obviously, the one on the left shows you exactly, and it's just incredible for us and probably you to think that this happened in 2017 in central London. Difficult for us to accept, but really difficult to see. And at this moment in time, there's still an unknown number of people who have lost their lives. And I am actively, because it's happened in London, I'm actively helping the Metropolitan Police Service in terms of their investigation as their professional advisor. So very early days, but there's a lot of questions being asked about the fire safety of that premise under the private enterprise. So I'm going to move on to a little bit. I'm going to drill into Gloucestershire now. I'll give you a bit of a context about the county, but I'm going to put 3 bold statements out there for you at this stage. When I joined as a firefighter 28 years ago, somebody said to me, "Fire is not discriminatory." Okay, and I'm going to leave that one hanging. Okay, then I'm going to also say that 60% of the fire deaths in England are the people are actually dead before the first 999 call comes in or 911 call comes in. So 60% of those people who die in house fires in England are dead before the first 999 call comes in. And lastly, I sit around the table every week with some of my peers, the Chief of Police, the Director of Social Care, the Director of Health, and the Director of Public Health. And I keep asking them the same question. You know who my next fire death is going to be. I just want you to tell me beforehand so we can do something about it. So these are 3 things I just want to leave hanging until I go on to my presentation. Okay, so I'm going to give a little bit of context about the county. So Mark, if you go to the slide where the county is, I've got 6 pictures up there. I'm not going to ask you to guess where they are, but we've got a population of just under 620,000, 1,024 square miles to cover, a patch of urban and rural. Top left is Gloucester Cathedral, bit of history there. It's one of the only places outside of London where one of our kings has been crowned, ordained. It was way back in the day, 1216. It was King Henry III. Do you know that? Yeah. and it's one of the only places outside London where we've also got a king buried. So King Edward II, he's buried in the cathedral. The one in the middle is GCHQ, Government Communications Headquarters. So it's right in the middle of our county in Cheltenham, and that building has got around about 4 levels above ground. It's got about 8 levels below ground, and it's a lot of US people, around about 1,000 US people who are working out that on a daily basis. But that's probably as much as I know and probably as much as they tell me. The top right is, very typical of a little English village, and we've got a few of these in Gloucestershire, and their expectations are exactly the same as what they expect in the big city of Gloucester or Cheltenham. We've got a couple of pictures on the bottom, which is Gloucester and Cheltenham races, and the one in the middle at the bottom, he's quite a needy chap. This is Prince Charles. He's the ascension to the throne, so he lives in our county. And we've got to make sure that we give him the same services as everybody else. And I say that quite tongue-in-cheek because he is quite a needy chap, I must admit. God bless him. So the next slide I think I'm on this one here. In terms of the fire service in Gloucestershire, we're part of the county council. I've got a number of responsibilities. I won't go through all of these individually. You can have a look at them. Some of them are really strange and how they line up with the fire service, but Syrian refugee resettlement is very important for the UK at this moment in time. The government are bought into that package, and we manage that on their behalf. And things like registration services, trading standards, and coroner services again are really important for the council, and we operate that on behalf of the council. So if you flick on, this is our county, and I've colour coded this one because in the pink areas, which is our main urban conurbations, they've got full-time firefighters crewing the fire engines there, and in the green areas we've got what's known as retained. So these are not volunteers; they're retained. They get paid for being on call. They get paid for their activity, and they are trained to the same level as full-time professional firefighters. And they work, socialise, and live within their local areas, and they've got pagers, pocket alerters, and when they go off, they make their way to the fire station, and they do a fantastic job of keeping local communities safe, and they do it in a very proactive way as well. I've just noticed on the slide there, I've put we've got a bit of a cultural issue in England about white males in the fire service, but I can cover that later on in my presentation. Legislation is very important. I'm going to probably highlight three of these bits. The Fire Services Act in 2004, one of the amongst the usual statutory duties, one of the statutory duties, the new duty, was that the fire service now has a duty to promote community safety within their local community. And that was chief fire officers right across the country were trying to push that. The regulatory reform order in England and Wales gives us the statutory duty to just audit the risk assessments. It no longer allows us to do inspection. And quite controversially, the one I've put in the right-hand side, the Policing and Crime Act, you probably think, what's policing and crime got to do with the fire service? This controversially now allows police and crime commissioners to take over the governance of the fire and rescue service, and it's causing a bit of concern and a bit of background noise right across England at this moment in time. Yeah. So, if you've got police and crime commissioners out there, they're allowed to take over the fire service now, where a business case is made. So, our journey.
Is that legislation passed?
Yep, it's passed, and the Home Office, the UK Home Office, has given £1 million to 10 commissioners at this moment in time to go out and get consultants to do the business case. So they did one in Gloucestershire, and it's fallen at the first hurdle because of the quality service that we give as an integral part of the council, because of the relationships we have with adult social care, health, and children's and families and public health. It's really important for us to stay there. So.
What did Theresa May, what was the rationale for doing that?
The rationale was, I think it's out of tidiness, if nothing else, because the Fire and Rescue Service used to be in the Department of the Local Communities and Government, but then we were moved across to the Home Office where the police are, and of course the money then was within DCLG, and now the money's in Home Office, and they want the money to stay within the Home Office rather than having local councils benefiting from money which comes from that Home Office rather than DCLG. So it's all politics, but I don't do politics very well. We're officers, aren't we, Mike? We don't do politics well. But our journey started about 4 years ago, and we were very much an emergency response service. So we used to wait for the 999 calls coming in, and our firefighters then used to respond. And it was the firefighters very comfortable with that model, but we had to change because of some of the statistics we had, and we had the worst fire record in Western Europe in terms of fire fatalities and fire injuries. And the government and ourselves, we got around the table and we thought we would have to take a different approach.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
You said that the bulk of the fatalities occurred prior to even a call being made, an emergency call. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking that a lot of the fatalities that occur in these fires happen through smoke inhalation and things like that. What was the principal reason why the fatalities occurred even before a call was made?
Okay, so if it's okay, Commissioner, I'll come to that because it's in one of my slides, and I'll go to it in depth if that's okay. But what we decided to do in Gloucestershire, and this was replicated in Staffordshire and Greater Manchester, we wanted to do upstream prevention, and I love that story that Mike has given this morning. And we introduced what was very much a demand and risk management model. And this was about change, transformation, and the first step was making sure we had the culture within the organisation, the staff having the buy-in to be able to do that. Because we had very transactional managers, very process-driven. They liked things written down, and this is what we do if this happens. But what we wanted them to do was be empowered, make decisions at the right level, demonstrate some real good leadership, and make decisions of a good quality nature. And that was very, very difficult for us because we had a single point of entry into the fire service in England. So they come in as a firefighter, and you work your way up. And you can come in as a firefighter without any qualifications whatsoever. So it was important, in terms of, we move to the next slide, Mark, it was important for us to move on from that. So the outcome of our cultural audit was not good. We got a lot of criticism from our staff, but I didn't bring that slide with me. But what I did bring was the good slide, okay? And these were the good things that they brought. And we thought, actually, let's start focusing on the good things and start building it from there and building up. One of the things that our firefighters did tell us was that they didn't want the pendulum to swing too much towards prevention and protection. They wanted us to focus on emergency response as well. So we've got this mantra now across in England that we have a three-pronged approach. It's it's prevention, it's protection, and it's response, and they're equally balanced. So that's probably the next slide, which is there. And so if you flick to that, our firefighters very much want to remember that they are there also to put out fires, And that was a compromise that we were absolutely willing to make, because on 40% of the occasions, they can make a difference with the red lorries. And that's what we did. But, you know, to take a step back to where we were in Gloucestershire in 2009-12, this was the kind of traditional emergency response focus that my predecessor took the council down. And this is all very focused on, you know, reactive operational response. There was a single objective around prevention. There was no focus within the organisation about it. There was very moderate interest. It hadn't been sold very well. We didn't do our marketing very well at all at that stage, and there was relatively no importance. And the firefighters, you know, were pretty keen just to crack on and play with the big red toys and boats and everything else which comes with it. We introduced our new mission, and this was very, very carefully put together. Every word on that page, because our firefighters told us we did not want a 60-page strategy. They didn't want that at all. They wanted a strategy on a page. So we thought very carefully. We worked with our staff, and every word on that page is very, very carefully put together. Working together for a safer Gloucestershire is part of the Gloucestershire PLC. So it's the council's mantra, it's health's mantra, it's everybody's doing the same sort of thing. I actually think later on this year we will probably move that on to working together for a safer and healthier Gloucestershire, because I think that's probably where we need to be moving forward. But we wanted in the fire service to have a statement to support that mission, and we put that out as working together. We will provide the highest standard of community safety first, and then secondly, emergency response services to our communities. And overarching all this is making sure that we invest and give our people the equipment and the training that they need, the learning and development that they need to deliver this new type of service that we were wanting to produce. And our primary aim down the bottom is prevention and protection. We also make sure that our response and resilience, as I said, is good. And very importantly, across in the UK, and I would suggest it's no different here in the US, our performance is monitored regularly, and we're held to account for our performance in terms of adding value, value for money, and continuous improvement.
Chief, in Gloucestershire, do you provide medical services? Or?
Okay, so we'll get to that.
Okay, never mind.
This
Keep
is
going then.
great that you're second guessing what my slide deck looks like. But in terms of, it would have been easy for us as a strategic leadership team and myself as the chief to go away and say this is going to be our new values. And very traditionally, I would suggest that a lot of organisations fall into that trap, and then the staff never buy into the values because they're their values, they're not ours. So we established a team called Inclusive Network Group, and the Inclusive Network Group is made from the firefighter to the vehicle mechanic, right the way through to the fire control staff and the administration staff. They all form part of a team, and they were then tasked to come up with some new values for the organisation. And we did not set out to have ethic written there, but it was one of these consequences of putting these values together. And if you look at the Oxford Dictionary, ethic actually stands for a system of moral standards and principles, and we run with it because and we're probably benefiting from that as we speak now. I think all our staff now buy into our values. We had a lot of managers in the organisation who were transactional managers. They weren't leaders, and they kept trying to do the same thing and expect different outcomes. And we couldn't use that. And we use this kind of Einstein quote quite often now, and it hits home to our staff because we can't we can't solve our problems today the same thinking we used to create them 10, 15 years ago. So we did a bit of change of culture. We've introduced a People First program. We recruit. We haven't recruited for 5 years, but we did a recruitment process because we were shrinking the staff. We recruited this year. We introduced 21 brand new firefighters. There was a great gender balance. We had of these 21 firefighters, there was 13 females, and we very much had a strengths-based and values-based recruitment process. So this wasn't about being able to put ladders up or work pumps, because we can train them to do that. We wanted them to have the right strengths, the right values, and the right attitude and approach coming in. And it was about making sure they had that prevention approach and they accepted that prevention approach moving forward. We also have worked very, very hard in terms of our leadership. We put our leaders on programs, right up to the chief fire officer. There's a pathway of development. As a chief fire officer, I've been successful in getting an MBA and a postgrad diploma, and a number of chartered director roles in terms of my development, and we have that all the way down to the firefighter who gets a learning development package at that level. We try to instill a culture of innovation and creativity where people are not afraid to make mistakes. In fact, the people who don't make mistakes are probably not making good decisions, or making decisions at all. And we have struggled really, really hard in terms of our communication. We've tried various methods of communication. People don't like emails, they don't like long letters and long-winded sort of paragraphs in terms of where we are. They want face-to-face, and they want some new modern technology. And you know, we do some. I do a weekly blog in terms of an explainer software, which all the staff can get to hear what my thoughts are, and on a weekly basis. And the maximum they want is 3 minutes. They don't want any more than 3 minutes. They don't want me droning on for any longer than that. I can be quite verbose, as you're probably finding this morning. It's very important for us to know our current operating environment, and we review this on an annual basis. But at this moment in time, as the Chief of Gloucestershire, I'm very focused on firefighter and community safety, and we always, at all times, try to protect and improve frontline outcomes. Now, you've probably heard that term, protecting the front line, and sometimes that means, you know, protecting frontline jobs. But what we try to do is protect frontline outcomes, so we make better outcomes for our frontline. It doesn't necessarily say we're going to have the same number of people in the service moving forward. We always try to reduce our costs and become more efficient. That's just a way of life now across in the UK. The budgets are still reducing, and we've got a 1% reduction over the next 3 years to make in Gloucestershire, which again is no mean feat, as 81% of the budget which comes into fire is for staff costs. And the other 19% is probably non-negotiables, like fuel and utilities. And the two in the bottom are really, really important for us. We feel very much an integrated public sector service. We like working in partnership. We see the benefits of it. And we also try to help partners to achieve their outcomes with some of the capacity that we've got within the Fire and Rescue Service. So our journey, just set against our story, best part of 5-10 years ago, we had an increase in fire incidents, increase in fire injuries, and the intelligence gathered that showed that, again, what I said earlier, 60% of those people who died in fires were dead before the first treble 9 call came in. And if we were true to all of our communities, and we want to save all of our communities from fire, the red lorries would not have made any difference on these occasions. That's why we focused very much on having that blended approach of prevention and protection and emergency response. So we've got a slide here that the plan that Meet Locals needs. We've got a number of plans. We're pretty good at our documentation. So we've got a 3-year strategy for prevention that's tied in with our partners. We drill down into, we've got 6 districts within Gloucestershire, so we've got district plans in terms of risk reduction. We then always produce social return on investment and financial return on investment plans, and we go right down into local towns. We've got station action plans for these towns to make sure that we reduce risk and make these communities safer and healthier. We always, and this was a question which was asked earlier on, we always try to target the most vulnerable. So in effect, what we tried to do now is, in the southwest of England, we carried out a bit of research, a bit of academic research, and there was 7 risk factors which were prevalent in every single one of 88 fire deaths over a 5-year period. So in the southwest of England, over that 5-year period, we had 88 fire deaths, and these 7, there was 1 or more of these 7 risk factors in every one of these deaths. And living alone was the one which surprised us. But if you actually think about it logically, if a person falls asleep on a chair and they're alone, there's nobody there to wake them up or say, look, you're still smoking, or that sort of stuff. And it's a real risk for us. But these are the 7 risk factors that we focus on our safe and well visits, and we're going to go on to safe and well visits that we do, and our firefighters do these visits. So frontline firefighters, rough, tough firefighters, they go out and do these visits. But the way we try to target, and this has been a bit of an evolution for us, we've gone from a bit of a broad brush approach with some very, very, very limited data and intelligence, and just looking at different areas across Gloucestershire, and we did a broad brush approach to that. It wasn't that successful. Our firefighters were telling us we were going in to carry out safe and well checks and fit smoke alarms in houses which really were not high risk. In fact, they were low risk. So we worked with a couple of companies. One was Experian, and they produced a software called Mosaic. And we've got locally in Gloucester and in the southwest of England, we've got Acorn Maiden. And what they tried to do for us, along with our partner information intelligence, because this is one part of it. So the data is one part of it. Our partner intelligence is very important to us as well. So health, and we've got a national health service in England. We've got public health. We've got adult social care, we've got the police, and we've got children's and family. They've all got databases which were single databases. In Gloucester now we've got a combined database where all the vulnerable information goes in, or the vulnerable person's information goes into a single database, and as a trusted partner, the Fire and Rescue Service is able to glean the information from that and then go out and target our home visits. So our firefighters actively go out and knock on people's doors which are identified as vulnerable people in the community with these risk factors. Age is probably the eighth one, which is missing off the chart, and we make that difference by doing that. All of our safe and well checks we carried out, and if you go to the next slide, Mark, we carried out over 7,000 safe and well checks in people's homes last year. 75% of these 7,146 were carried out in the most vulnerable people within our communities. And the chart there, the graph, which I put up there, this is about a 5-year journey for us. So you can see the number of safe and well checks that we're carrying out, going out to have risk assessments in these people's homes, are increasing. The number of incidents are decreasing. I think it's quite and over the last 10 years now, we've got a 54% reduction in all of our incidents that were tended by the Fire and Rescue Service. The next slide, Mark, if you put that one up, it's much of the same. Sorry, this is the one which is all of our incidents so again, our staff and our public don't want lengthy documents about performance. They want these kind of trendy icons, so we put these up. And so, as I said, 54% reduction of incidents over the last 10 years, over 7,000 safe and well checks, 8% reduction year on year. 24% reduction in road traffic collisions, which is a big issue for us across in England.
Sir, could you just, and I know we're pressed for time, but could you take a minute and just tell us what happens in a safe and well check?
That's
coming up.
Yeah. You guys as commissioners and mayors are really good because you're predicting what my slides are. So if you go to the next slide then, Mark, our prevention activities, we started off, you able to go to the next one? Yeah, we started off very traditional. But what we try to do now is we are traditional and adding value. So what we did initially was broad brush approach, fitting smoke alarms and giving fire safety advice. And it was limited to fire safety advice. But what we do now is we very much have a wider health check and many other interventions linked with health and social care. And what we are trying to produce out of that is independent, resilient and stronger communities. And we're now beginning some success. So the next two slides are really important. The first one is about the expanding role of a firefighter across Gloucestershire and some of other parts of England. So the firefighter does all the statutory roles of the Fire and Rescue Service, firefighting, road traffic collisions, hazmats, everything like that. We provide a falls pickup service. So from that one there, the ambulance service, which is a separate entity in England. So we've got they work for the Department of Health and they've got a separate ambulance service. Their capacity and their demand is going through the roof, and they are really in a pretty poor state in terms of being able to deliver an effective service. So
you you haven't in the past responded to heart attacks and things like that, right?
We'll get there.
Oh.
Okay, so I'm going around the circle, I'll get there. So the falls pickup service was previously done by the ambulance service, and there was trained paramedics which went out to pick elderly people generally who'd fallen over in their property. And 75% of these occasions, there was no medical intervention needed. All they were required was just to be picked up and given a cup of tea and carry on their day. So the fire service in Gloucester now do that on the ambulance service behalf. We have got somebody, we were part of a hospital discharge package of care previously. And this was an interesting one for me because we've got vulnerable people who are leaving the acute hospitals and going back into their local communities. And we wanted to know who they were, and we wanted to be part of their risk assessment when they went back into the house in terms of their package of care. And we give all of our clinical commissioning groups and our local authorities some information about what the fire service can offer, but we ended up finding it not being very effective. So if you go right across to this on the left-hand side, we now embed a care navigator role within that hospital discharge package of care team. So one of our firefighters sits within that team and actually, picks up the information, sometimes leads what the package of care is going to be for that individual when they're back in their own home. We carry out the specialist rescues. We do an awful lot of community safety and engagement, and one of the benefits of having our retained firefighters is that they live, work and socialise within their local areas. They become pillars of that local community, and they're embedded, and they do a really good job of selling the fire and rescue service. So the medical emergency response, up to about 4 years ago, Commissioner, we didn't do that in the fire and rescue service, but with the capacity issues with the ambulance service across England, we started to take an interest. So all of our fire stations now do medical emergency response. They do a service up to defibrillation. They don't do lines in, but they do defibrillation. And they're generally, in our rural towns, they're generally the first on scene to deliver medical emergency care. We're now bringing that into the urban conurbations of Gloucester and Cheltenham and Stroud, and they are now responding with fire engines to cardiac care. They go to concerns for safety, where the ambulance would have responded previously. They would have got there, and they couldn't enter the property because they didn't have the tools or the skills to enter the property. So the police then used to come. They didn't have the skills or the tools, so they now mobilise the fire service. And I think that's eminently sensible that we do that.
So why are the fire services doing these things rather than the visiting nurses and the caseworkers, the social workers? Why did that you decide to have the firefighters do this?
So the visiting nurses and the social care workers, they still do an element of this, but the problem we've got is they don't have the capacity to do the cover-all approach. So we're filling a gap, and we're becoming more prevalent in terms of our expertise and something that we can offer to the public. But the bottom line is that they just did not have the capacity to do all of what's happening in England. We've got an ageing population across there.
And how does the wage of firefighters compare with the wage of social workers and visiting nurses?
Okay, so a firefighter in England, fully competent, fully qualified, earns £29,000 British pounds, and a social worker now is around about £24,000. But our firefighters can also respond to emergencies as well and put fires out. So, in effect, when we do our safe and well checks, we went through probably a year of learning, upskilling our firefighters to become trusted assessors. So they got dementia awareness training. They were given training on carrying out basic eye tests, etc. And in addition, the last one for me in the top left is telecare response. So we've got people who are living within our communities, and they are vulnerable, and they need assistive technology. So the pull cords in the house, or the pendants which are around their necks. And when they press that, they need 2 local responders. To get that facility, they need 2 local responders. Often it's family and friends, but if they don't have family and friends, they don't get the service, and they then end up in care, and care is costly. So our firefighters have plugged that gap, and they now respond to these people who have now got assistive technology, but they don't have local responders. So our firefighters do that, and we do that on a pay-as-you-go basis, so we recover our costs. So if we move to the next slide, Mark, and I think this is what a safe and well check. So if a firefighter goes out to do a safe and well check, they'll still do the fire safety element, and they'll fit smoke detectors. We do home safety and product testing. We've got some big issues with electrical appliances of late, and that's what the reported cause of the Grenfell fire was. So if you think that big image of that multi-storey building, it was a fridge freezer which started it off, and it's shocking. We do frailty checks, so when people are moving from middle age to old age, our social care social workers ask us to carry out frailty checks, and they give us a Rockwood scale, and the firefighters are trained up to operate that and work that and feed it back into the system. We do crime prevention assessments on behalf of the police because they don't have the capacity to do that. We do social isolation assessments, smoke and alcohol substance misuse, falls assessments, flu vax. We don't actually, our firefighters don't actually carry the flu vax, they just signpost them, and we host clinics on our fire stations. We do cold homes assessments and make sure that they've got temperature thermometers in the house, and we make sure that we work with the utilities to make sure that they have that. And I've got a really good story about one of this about the brand of the fire and rescue service, and how the brand of the fire and rescue service can enter into people's homes much better than other people. And we carry out basic eye tests, and we signpost to opticians, and give them vouchers as well, because we get that from our social care teams. All these assessments are carried out by our frontline firefighters. And it was interesting, probably about 4 weeks before I came across here, we had an incident in one of our urban conurbations, Cheltenham, And there was an old guy. He was vulnerable, and the social workers had been along, the police had been along. They tried to enter into his property, but he refused them entry because he thinks they're the authorities, and he thinks they're going to take him away and put him into care. And so the police and the social care had a bit of a conflab. They phoned for the fire service, so our firefighters turned up. So our firefighters knocked on the door, said it's the fire service, and he just opened the door and let them in. And that's the power of the brand of the Fire and Rescue Service. He let them in, he trusts them, and he was living in extreme poverty. He had no furniture, he had no utilities, so no gas, no electricity. He was a hoarder, so he had a hoarded property, and he was cooking a can of beans on a gas stove, just one of these canisters, a camping stove. And after about, say, 15-20 minutes of the firefighters, convincing that individual that the social workers and the police are there to help him, he let them in, and they were then able to make a difference in making that person safe. And we carried out a home safety check, and bless my firefighters, they felt really sorry for this old chap. On their own volition, they hired a skip, and they went back when their day's off the next day, and they helped the guy empty his house and make it a little bit more presentable. And I'm hugely proud of them for that.
Are these the fire and well checks?
Yep.
Are they based on this predictive modeling? So it's not just whoever
No.
calls you and says, I want a home safe and well check.
Absolutely.
You're focusing on where you want to do
Yeah,
these.
so 75% last year, Commissioner, were carried out on the most vulnerable, and 25% were the ones who phone up and say, we would like one as well. So we try to have an equal approach to this safe and well check. And sometimes when we don't think they're vulnerable, we can pick up some instances where they're moving into a risky area. But 75% are those most vulnerable. That's what we've done.
What do you say to them when you show up at their door? That we're just the fire service?
We're the
and
Fire and Rescue
we'd like
Service,
to
and
inspect
we're the
your-
Fire and Rescue Service, and we're here to do a safe and well check. We do a big marketing campaign across Gloucestershire, and generally people now know what we're all about. And it's very much not a traditional fire and rescue service. So I'll just very quickly go across this. In terms of upstream prevention, we were very fortunate to have a £5 million government investment in a next generation life skills centre. And so in Gloucestershire, we've got a life skills centre where our school children go visit our life skills centre on 2 occasions, and they learn about fire safety and all the other hazards of life. There's 16 different stations where they go around, and this is a 2 visit through their schooling. And what they do is they make sure that we're trying to make sure that the next generation which are coming through are safe. I've got one last slide to go, I think, and I'm just about there. I think Roy's ready to give me the red card across there in terms of time. But this is some of the impact of the Fire and Rescue Service offer. I won't go through these, but they're quite striking, and I'm extremely proud of the way my managers and my firefighters have embraced this change. It's not been without difficulty, but we have worked things through. We all want the same thing. We want safer and healthier communities, and we get there in the end. And I'm very proud of my staff who have done this, and it makes me very privileged to be the Chief Fire Officer of Gloucestershire Fire and Rescue Service, and I'm very privileged to speak here to you in Portland today. Thank you.
Chief, thank you. That was really fantastic. I have just one more question. Did your firefighters ask for extra pay to learn these new skills?
They did. They did. But I didn't have any more money to give them. And that was the conundrum we had. And I always referred them back to the Fire and Rescue Services Act 2004. So this is our piece of legislation. And on that piece of legislation was that we needed to promote community safety. And so I bag it as a statutory duty under the Act, and that comes with the role of the firefighter from here on in. It's a very important piece of legislation for us.
Well, they have less fires to respond to now, so it evened out, right?
There was all these comments initially because the fires are going down, and some of the older firefighters who've been in good 20-25 years, they were telling me that we're actually doing ourselves out of a job. But what I would say to you is, and it's probably no different here in the US, I had firefighters coming home back to the station, and they were saying, that was a great job, Chief. We had a great job this morning. It was a big fire. We had a great job. And actually, all we were doing at that stage was dwelling on people's misfortunes. and the impact it has on individuals. If it's a fire in their own home, they lose all their possessions. Ultimately, they could lose life. And if it's in business, you know, it's having a massive impact on the local economy and economic growth within the county. So, you know, we can't sit there and dwell on people's misfortunes anymore, albeit, you know, some of my firefighters still want big fires, but we don't want to do that anymore.
And I want to join the Commissioner and the Mayors for thanking you, Chief Edgar. I know you took time out of your away from your work. You traveled all the way across over here on a very long flight and spent a number of days working with me personally on what you've done there. And very excited, not only for me, us personally here in Portland, but from the fire industry. Thank you for finding a solution for the future. Mayor and Commission, I'll wrap up. We've got about 15 minutes left, 20 minutes left, so I'm going to move through some slides. I think what you've heard today is that the current health trends from Rachel Banks, kind of what we're facing out there. Many of these things you probably already had known. I thought Jonathan tied it up nicely to show that there is data out there. This can be predictable. We can know where the next issues are, where they reside, almost down to the home. That will allow us to really design an approach for prevention that is be very, very, very unique and extremely efficient. And I think the UK has shown that there is a successful model out there. A sharp, significant reduction in call volume over 4 years. The ability to control call volume is what we should be doing. It is corrective action placed in exactly the right point. And so I'll be working more closely with the chief as we continue forward. You'll notice the priorities on the screen. You're very aware of these. I want to take one step further than where the UK is looking. These priorities align nicely with all of the issues that we're facing here in Portland, what I personally face with. So you might ask yourself at some point, and you'll go to one more slide, Mark, you might ask yourself, what does the fire chief care about sidewalks? Why does the fire chief care about grocery stores? Why does the fire chief care about parks? Why do I care about some of these interesting infrastructure and built environment things that every one of your bureaus are working on? I have a vested interest in safe, walkable places, access to healthy foods, access to health care, a quality built environment, resilient cities, vibrant neighborhoods. Those are all public health related. So my commitment back to you here today is that we as a fire bureau will be working closely, arm in arm, hand in hand with your bureaus in helping you meet your outcomes. Rachel, I offer you the same commitment that working with OHE and the Oregon Health Equity Alliance, Mary Lou, in helping with that community health improvement plan, we can bring that capacity that the chief talked about. We are the largest public health agency in the community. We have 30 brick and mortar fire stations strategically placed around this community that are invested in those neighborhoods. We call them firehouses for a reason. These are houses, 24-hour staffed houses in these neighborhoods with an officer, a company officer, a captain in charge of that neighborhood. It's the perfect alignment. It's the right next step, and the proof has been displayed across the Atlantic.
So a question about that, though. Aren't our fire buildings evenly distributed around, they're distributed around the city in relation to the likelihood of fires, right? So do they then match up with the factors that John was then talking about, or are you thinking that people would go from would move staff from one area to another based on the risk factors?
We may. First, I wanted to ask Mark Whitaker really quickly to ask this. I asked him this question. What do we look like today, Mark? Are we providing an equitable service? And we were confident enough to give our data up to HAC Oregon and allow them to tell us, are we equitable or not in our service delivery today? And then I'll take it from there. Mark?
Thank you, Chief. So as I think the council has already heard some of the presentation from HAC Oregon, we had a pretty successful partnership with them to share our data and have them produce this website for us. And I'll just skip to the piece on our response times, because I know you guys have already heard from HAC Oregon. But one of the things that they looked at for us was how our response time compared across the city, and that's those first three charts there. And so as you can see, our response time is fairly equal across the city, whether you're looking at the first chart there by the population of the station's area, its fire management area, the density of the area is not affecting our response times. If you look at the middle graph there, the median income of that fire station's area does not have a huge effect on response times. In fact, our slower response times are in some of the higher income neighborhoods due to geography. So we're not failing the equal response times in that respect. And same based on the percentage of the population that is people of color. Our response times are pretty random in that respect too. So in our current state, with our current configuration of 30 fire stations, and given Portland's geography, our response times are fairly equal across the city, and that's something that we're proud of.
So the next step, next question, though, however, takes us a little bit farther, and we talked about, I think, Rachel, you kind of addressed the equity thought process, and I've thought about that myself. It's nice to have a very equitable service delivery model across the city of Portland, but I have to ask myself, do we want to treat all of our neighbors the same? Do we want to treat the neighbors as they want to be treated, or both? I think we definitely have to have engine companies that are able to respond to equitable service delivery across the community. But in reference to your question, Commissioner, I do believe each community, each neighborhood has separate need and different requests and different expectations. So let's go to the map quickly. I have a map in front of you. This one here. You have a sheet in front of you, about 11 by 17 map in front of you. So these obviously are obvious to you. These are your fire stations. There are 30 of them spread out all over the geographical area of Portland. And that was the data that Mark used with Hack Oregon. Up in the left-hand corner, far over, you see number 27. That's Forest Hills. And then we're right down here at Station 1, right in the middle. And then station way out to the right there in the east, 31. We'll just look at those 3 fire stations. I would argue that the fire problem in Station 27, up in the wildland urban interface area of Forest Park, where they have poor defensible zones, a lot of wildland urban interface, that fire problem different than the fire problem down here in Station 1, right down here in this area, correct? And different from the fire problem over at Station 31 out toward Gresham. Agreed? I would also argue, and I think Rachel could give me a nod, that the public health issues that are facing the neighborhood and the community in Station 27 up in Forest Park, different than the health issues that we're facing right here in Station 1's area, that are probably different than the top 3 health issues being faced out in Station 31's area. The graphs clearly show all of the data we've looked at from all of these 3 different individuals suggest that there are different needs in different communities. We know that. Each neighborhood is unique in its need. So why wouldn't we tailor our community risk reduction model? Why wouldn't we tailor our response model based on what the neighborhood needs and what the neighborhood wants, rather than one generic coverall for the entire city of Portland? That's the next step. Then invest in these firehouses to make sure they can help these individuals here, people like Mary Lou and Ojai, meet their outcome goals. And then us get to the table and help drive success with your bureaus on whatever those needs are. They align with us, right? It's about health in all policy. It's that health lens that we all need. And my job as the fire chief is to bring you innovative, unique, and different approaches that are different from the past and set the trend for the future. My suggestion is you will not find this anywhere else in the United States. We will lead the fire industry. We will take that step, and it is quite bold, and it is a heavy lift, and I'm sure you have many questions about how it will get done, as do I. But our interest is to develop what's called a blueprint for success, for each one of these fire management agency areas. It'll take time. We'll have to learn how to do it. There are people like Ojai that's already working on community health improvement plans. We're going to align with those so we don't duplicate work. We're going to start out with one FMA, see how we do, and start working on outcomes, teach those firefighters, and we'll continue to spread across the city of Portland until we have great outcomes in every area of the city of Portland. That's what this presentation was about today. And I want to thank you for giving me all your time. I know you have a bunch of questions, so let's start with you, Commissioner.
Yay, I get to ask a question. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you all for your presentations. This is fascinating stuff. I carry the title of Commissioner of Public Safety, although I do not have any public safety. Well, I mean, BDS intersects with public safety. It's really just decorative, but I happen to be really interested in this issue. My questions are for John, and you could attempt to answer them now, or we could follow up. But I'm particularly interested in that statistic around owner-occupied homes, the discrepancy between owner-occupied and non-owner-occupied. And I'm wondering if you have data that would let us get to the root of that discrepancy, if it lies on the side of the tenants, if it lies on the side of the landlords, if it's a combination of the two, if it's because we have perhaps hundreds of vacant, neglected, single occupant homes, and some of which are being squatted, and we know we've had fires there. So that's my first question. Any immediate thoughts or?
Thanks. From these data, I think there are ways that I can drill down and give you a more specific answer. One source might be to look at the code enforcement violations and see whether, for example, the patterns of resident complaints versus neighbor complaints to assess sort of how much the owner might, I mean, those would tend to point towards the owner. My impression from my other work is that that's an issue that is so complex that might be kind of hard to pull out of at least the data that we've got right here.
Sure, yeah. I could see a variety of approaches to that. Knowing the root causes would drive how we address it, though. Is it a renter education issue, a landlord education issue? We're considering having mandatory inspections for rental properties. That would be a huge undertaking. It's thousands and thousands of units. As mentioned, we don't necessarily inspect single occupancy, single family residences. So this would be an interesting model to maybe prioritize what we start with. My other question is, we are currently in negotiations with Airbnb around our short-term rental regulations, and they are asking us to basically create a honor system for landlords, a pass-through permitting system where an inspection, which is currently required, would no longer be required. And again, I'm kind of interested in how we could use your data and studies to determine whether or not we want to do that, and maybe how we would want to change how we conduct inspections or prioritize inspections. Do you have any thoughts on that?
One idea that comes to mind is that if they would give you data on the dates and times that properties have been occupied as by
That'd be
Airbnb
nice.
renters, then you could really look at what the fire incidence is in places that are with whether having renters, Airbnb short-term renters might affect fire risk in those properties. Certainly, the purpose of this project is to create a ranked list such that for any given prospective Airbnb property, you could have a measure of whether we think that's a relatively high or relatively low risk property, which could be used to prioritize or to, in the aggregate, say, perhaps the prospective Airbnb properties tend to be above average risk to begin with, so we should inspect them, or maybe they tend to be below risk, maybe they don't.
And are you concerned at all that people might feel discriminated against due to this ranking system? So, whether it's the neighborhood their house is in, their income. I mean, some of the risk factors are
So I think
sensitive.
transparency is important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I appreciate you saying that, because that's really going to be it. If we go down this path, and this is the process that we choose, I think we all know that total transparency would rule the day, and that means how the model is predicted, why we're doing it this way. I think people will always harbor those views if you show up on their doorstep and why'd you pick me? So I think that will always be of concern. I think we need to be very aware of that, understand that people are concerned about that, and then educate ourselves on how we address that issue, because that will come up.
Thank you.
So obviously, Mayor, I think we would need about an hour at least for council discussion of this. I appreciate you prioritising the time here so that our guests from out of town gave us all the information that you did have. One of my main questions is the map of the risks does not match the map of the fire districts. So how would this be implemented, and why is it the City of Portland's fire and rescue services responsibility to do this rather than the county public health folks if we're talking about this? And I really, as I say, I think we need a long time, but that's one of my foundational questions, just because of the different structure of how we do things. Plus, we're currently in arbitration with our fire union. They get premiums for pretty much everything extra that they do, including driving the back of the lorry. So I can't imagine that this would, moving to us taking on so much more responsibility, wouldn't come with a large price tag, which is something we'd have to discuss.
So I appreciate those questions, and we will. I certainly, at some point, I think a longer session or a longer opportunity to answer those is appropriate. And no doubt, Chief Ag, we're going to have long talks about moving the workforce to a point where this is favorable and something that they're excited about. With relevance to why one is doing it or not the other, I go back to my original discussion. No one entity will be successful. Public health, Multnomah County Public Health will fail if they go at it alone. We will fail if we try to go at it alone. OHE will fail if they try to go at it alone. It must be a team effort of multiple different public and private agencies working together on one key way they're going to do business, one vehicle to get this done. And that's why I agree. It's challenging and complex, but if it was easy, they'd probably be already doing it.
Can I make a comment? First, I want to thank you and Commissioner Salzman for scheduling this presentation. I'd be hard-pressed to think of a more effective council presentation on a timely subject that in my 9 years on the council. And I want to thank our honored guests for coming here. And when the chief goes back to do further inspections of your work, I've offered to carry his luggage just as part of my selfless public service. One of the things that I was hearing, though, through this presentation is this idea that we're going to use data more strategically and crunch numbers and identify risks. And I just want to pose an opportunity. We all know that when you knock on someone's door, particularly single-family residents, and given the current state of the law, you're going to get resistance for a lot of reasons. And particularly among older adults, because they're getting bombarded now with unwelcome solicitations. And frankly, they're a hard group to sign up for our emergency programs because of this trust factor. And they're constantly being bombarded by people that are unscrupulous, trying to get them to give information away. But I mean, we may have this happy confluence where there's a whole host of things that the city wants to do, and we've got someone in a firefighter's uniform who's the most trusted person in our community at the door saying, I'm here to help, it's voluntary. And the issues come up about money and collaboration. I just want to put down a marker. The Water Bureau has 2 or 3 ongoing needs right now that we haven't quite figured out how to crack the code. One is we want to get to people and offer them a low-income discount. And we want to particularly target folks that are eligible, and it's skewed in high-poverty areas. It's skewed older. It's skewed low-income families. But we have that data. We also want to get into high-risk homes where our water interacts with defective plumbing and faucets, and we want to be able to give them a public health message. That the county is our partner on that, but that's a companion piece we want to do. So here's a discount. I want to talk to you about flushing your water and some other things. Meanwhile, you want to get in and for a myriad of reasons, including making sure that there's a battery in the smoke detector. And frankly, in any decent system, you actually, I think you give away smoke detector alarm, smoke detectors. So
we do.
So you replace it. And then there's a visual scan, and there's some high-risk things that your folks often pick up, like as I mentioned earlier, newspapers next to the fireplace, outlets, things like that. But if Carmen Merlo were here, she'd say, God, we'd also like to sign people up for our emergency teams and ask people to give us some basic data. Well, I would love to do a pilot where we pulled together the bureaus that have this interest with our county partners, where we all brought money to the table because, you know, I mean, as Dan knows, like on our low-income discount program, we have money to do marketing and outreach. I mean, we have money that's not being expended. I would love to figure out a way to marry a number of things the city cares about in a pilot in areas that have been carefully targeted as high risk, and we define high risk in ways that probably overlap in some interesting ways with how you define high risk, and then see what we learn. But I mean, that to me, if that was Commissioner Saltzman, if that was a tangible outcome of this, where we got 2 or 3 bureaus together in the county and figured out a way to pilot, and then just tested it. How responsive are people? Are we hitting our mark? We would love to be a part of that, because frankly, again, a firefighter knocking on the door versus a typical city worker, it's a different experience, and your people in uniform, I think, have a better chance gaining entry to someone's home just because of the uniform and the relationship to the fire bureau.
Well, I can just look at each one of you and think of independent bureaus, ONI, the parks. You know, Dan and I have talked a lot about Leah Treat and I's relationship with traffic fatality reduction. It's self-evident that bureau-to-bureau relationships ultimately coming together over one topic of public health is critical. So, you know, I don't have all the answers here today. You know, we're not down the path yet. This really was about introducing this to you, this concept, and then getting a general nod of, okay, go forth, and we will go ahead and do that. But I think you're right. I think there's a lot of opportunities out there. The theme pilot is necessary. We won't. I wouldn't recommend doing all of Portland at one time. We need small bites at the apple. Every neighborhood needs specific assistance, obviously, but I think we need to be able to show where we can invest, whether it's dollars or simply time and resources. Some of this won't cost money. Some of this is just time and resources of people that are already on the job doing different kind of work. It's re-angling. So I appreciate those comments, Commissioner. Thank you.
I'd just like to add a couple of things just for future conversations. In my job, I spend most of my time, and my staff expends most of their time working with residents who actually don't have a home at all. And you know, periodically I see dead people, and they're mostly dead people who died on our streets because they don't have a home. And so my question really, and I know that you guys call this rough camping, I think, or rough sleeping. Rough sleeping. This is a global issue. It's certainly a national issue, and it is at its height on the west coast of the United States, and it's a prevailing issue that seems to be getting worse. And all of these issues hit squarely center of that target in terms of how we need to address these issues. So I hope as we go about this, we think about not just houses, homes, neighborhoods, but we are also thinking about what I believe is the largest unfolding humanitarian crisis in our community, which is people who are not living under a roof. And I know, Chief, that your folks spend an increasing percentage of their time working with that population. I'm also struck, Jonathan, by the data question. That's really interesting to me, actually. And Chief Edgar mentioned in his presentation that they actually collect data on vulnerable populations and then share that data. And it sounds so wonderful, and it's so logical, and it's so obviously the right thing to do, and apparently that's why we don't do it. And we have struggled for many years, even with our homeless population, to figure out how to get our providers on the same platform and share the same data. And I suspect that question in and of itself is worthy of a PhD in terms of how do we actually do that, given the reluctance that Commissioner Fish mentioned that I think is very real, it's palpable, people's lack of trust in government institutions and even agents of government institutions. And secondarily, how do we actually share that data once we have it effectively for the best and highest use? So interesting issues. You have my head nod. I think it's good futuristic thinking, and it addresses the needs of the community. But I'd like those other concerns raised in context of the conversation. Commissioner Fritz.
Thank you, Matt. Because I'm not nodding just yet. I think that it does require a lot more council conversations about some of the things. I mean, one of the challenges in the United States is that we have HIPAA, the health privacy laws. The closer the firefighters get to being healthcare providers, the more HIPAA inserts its ugly head, and that really messes things up in terms of how can you actually help people. So I think we have to think that through very carefully in terms of how we help have the county as partners so that they are protecting HIPAA protected information. And then also, staffing equitably for healthcare issues is different from staffing equitably for fire issues. So are we talking about adding a whole lot more firefighters doing healthcare stuff, in which case is it really their job, the city's job to be paying for that? And so I know that we're going to also have a discussion of permanent supportive housing, which Commissioner Fish is leading the way on. I agree with the Mayor. We've got 6,000 odd people who aren't even living in housing, probably have the worst risks, even for wildfires and for setting fires to things outside, which they have. So it's not, I would like us to have more discussion because I'm seeing dollar signs all over.
And I welcome that. And I'll tell one thing right on the record today. The intent is not to increase cost or add more firefighters or more fire stations. It's the opposite. The opposite. This is about controlling health outcomes, reducing call volume so that we are not calling for more rescuers to come to the pool. It's the opposite of that. And I'll go on the record today, for as long as I'm here, that the interest is the opposite to that effect.
To say that, I appreciate our guests being here today, and I just really want to laud you, Chief Myers, for your vision and leadership in getting these things underway. And I realize it's it's a long game, but I think we are selecting 2 fire management areas, right, where we're going to pilot these community blueprints. So I think that's a great way to start. I know there's going to be a host of issues we'll encounter, but I guess what I'd like to see is, what I believe the vision is there will be, each fire management area will have its community blueprint, and they will also have an assignment of high-risk households that need to have fire safety and well checks.
That's correct, Commissioner.
Yeah.
And how we do that is what we're working on right now, how that's going to look and how we're going to do that. And there is a lot of work. This is an extremely heavy lift. It took 4 years for the chief to get there, and he's shared his horror stories, and he's obviously, this was not easy.
Yeah.
And it won't be easy here, but I think, like I said before, if it was, it would already be done. So thank you for
Okay.
your support, Commissioner.
Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you for the pin.